My name is David McAlpine. I'm the director of the UCL Ear Institute, and I'm also the professor of auditory neuroscience. I first got interested in hearing and hearing research when I was a student, and I worked in a laboratory on my summer holidays that was investigating how certain medicines actually make you deaf. So for some medicines that are working against cancer, for example, they have a side effect that actually damages your inner ear and makes you deaf. And ways of understanding how those medicines work and how you can stop them making you deaf while they're making you better, or at least treating your cancer, is actually an important aspect of some of the work we do here. So the things that make you deaf are actually interesting in understanding how the inner ear works, and also interesting in understanding how we can stop those things making you deaf. They are medicines for other conditions, so we don't want the side effect to be deafness. We want to be able to keep people healthy and keep them hearing at the same time. So we obviously need our ears to hear, but actually we hear with our brain, not just our ears. Our ears are picking up the sound and transmitting them the information about sound to our brain in the form of electrical pulses, but our brain is creating the sense of sound. It's creating where things are in space. It's telling us about what people are saying. It's helping us understand the environment in which we're listening. And our brain is one of our major organs for hearing, not just our ears. So your outer ear is very important. It's not just for keeping your glasses on. The outer ear has very important functions. One is to help you hear sounds that are quiet, so it acts like a radar dish, if you like, and picks up quiet sounds. And the other is to help you tell where sound sources are located, above you or beneath you. So sound energy hits the outer ear and is transformed, and when it gets to your eardrum, it's got particular sound energy increases or reductions depending on where the sound source is located. So a sound that's above you generates a different pattern of energy interactions at the outer ear than does the same sound source beneath you. So your outer ear helps you tell whether a sound is above you or beneath you, and that's a very important cue for localizing sounds. The middle ear is an air-filled space with several bones in it that transmits sound from the outside world to your inner ear. And the inner ear is a snail shell coiled structure inside that essentially contains all of the sensory cells and neurons, the nerve fibers that actually transmit sound to your brain. Sound energy is collected by the outer ear and transmitted down the ear canal to the eardrum. And inside the middle ear, there are three bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, and they connect from the eardrum to the oval window of the inner ear. So the sound vibrations that move the eardrum are transmitted as vibrations of those three bones into the oval window of the inner ear. And the vibrations are eventually turned into electrical pulses that are fed down the nerve to the brain. Many people who are deaf have problems in the inner ear. The sensory cells that are turning vibrations into electrical pulses and feeding them to your brain are actually damaged. And when those are damaged, it's very hard to repair them. So in fact, it's not yet possible to repair them. We have to look after them and try not to damage them. So loud sounds, certain drugs, and getting older tend to damage those sensory cells, and that's why our hearing can be impaired. And especially loud sounds in this modern age where we listen to iPods and lots of loud music can really damage our hearing well before we would assume that our hearing would be lost. Other than preventing hearing loss, the therapies that we have for hearing loss at the moment are hearing aids and cochlear implants. Everyone knows about hearing aids. This is a way of boosting the sound that's actually getting to your ear because your inner ear is damaged. If you have very severe damage to your inner ear, that won't help, and you'll need something called a cochlear implant. That's called electrical hearing. And these are devices which essentially are feeding electrical pulses into your inner ear and stimulating the neurons directly. That's because your sensory cells have all died or they're all damaged. So electrical hearing is one way of getting over that problem of severe or profound hearing loss. But it doesn't produce the same sensation of hearing as we have normally. And it's very hard to appreciate music and speech in noisy environments. So listening to other people speaking when there's lots of noise, listening to music, not very possible with hearing aids or cochlear implants. Currently, there are not very many biological therapies for hearing. In fact, we don't really have any. And what we need to do is develop those pills and those therapies that actually prevent hearing loss in the first place, or protect our hearing, especially if we have to work or in noisy environments, or we're listening to noisy sounds all of the time. But finding a way of giving a pill or some other therapy that reverses hearing loss is actually a major part of our research here at the Institute. And many people around the world are looking for those sorts of therapies and pills that will essentially prevent hearing loss or restart hearing if you've actually lost it. As a scientist, I would like to invent something that turned down the volume of the sound automatically so that it didn't damage our hearing. Often we don't know when a sound is damaging our hearing, and if we had some device that actually could detect that and turn down the volume of the sound even at our ears, then we would protect ourselves from hearing loss in the first place.
So my name is Maria Chait. I'm a senior research fellow at the UCL Ear Institute, and my research is funded by Deafness Research UK and by the Wellcome Trust. And my work is about understanding how hearing works in normal listeners. So what I do is I do both what is called psychophysics, which is playing sounds to listeners over headphones and giving them different tasks about the sounds, like asking them if they sound the same or different. And what I also do is I do brain imaging, so that involves putting listeners into a brain imaging device, playing sounds to them, and then trying to understand, without opening their brains, how these sounds are processed, which brain areas are activated, and what could go wrong when these brain areas are not working properly. So to understand the role of the brain in hearing, it is useful to consider a little story. So imagine you're standing by a lake, and imagine there are two little channels dug on each side of you, and you place a little object like a petal or a leaf in each channel. And now imagine somebody throws a stone into the lake, and the stone generates ripples in the water that propagate towards the channels and make the leaves move up and down. And now imagine there's another stone being thrown in a different place in the lake, and now the waves from this other stone propagate and interact with the waves, with the ripples from the first stone, and they generate some kind of complex pattern that now that reaches the channels and makes your leaves move up and down in a sort of rather complex pattern. And now imagine more and more stones being thrown into the lake in different places, and the sort of resulting waves propagating towards the channels and making your leaves move up and down. And now imagine that I asked you, from looking at those channels and those leaves, to explain to me what's happening on the lake. How many stones are being thrown, where they are, how heavy they were. I mean, it's an issue that any person would think is impossible, but is actually something that we as listeners do every day, all the time. So we can think of our ears as these channels. Our ears, in a sense, what they do, or the eardrum, what it does is it transmits sound, pressure in the air, into electrical signals that the brain can deal with. And the rest of the work, making sense of what the sound pressure contains, is something that the brain does. So we know that different objects in the environment, they merge into one waveform that enters each ear. And in order to make sense of the world, what we need to do is separate this waveform into different objects. We have to be able to know where they're coming from and be able to recognize them. So know what it is. Maybe know, for example, if we hear something falling, we can very easily know what it was made of, how big it was, how high it was dropped from. And all of this is something that the brain does, and rather effortlessly in normal listeners, but it all goes wrong in hearing impaired people, and this is what we're trying to understand. There's a lot of research effort both in the biological aspects of hearing impairment, so trying to fight, reverse, or prevent hearing loss. And there's also research in engineering in trying to design better hearing aids that would help hearing impaired people deal with the complexities of natural environments. What my research is about is trying to understand what aspects from sound you actually need in order to interact with the world. So sound is a complex, multidimensional thing, and it's not clear what aspects of this stimulus that enters the ear the brain actually uses to recognize voices, to compare between different sounds, to recognize speech. And understanding this is not just important for basic research. It's fundamental for being able to design better hearing aids. So knowing what information is it that we actually need these hearing aids to transmit to the brain. And it's also important for diagnosis. So being able to measure what, especially in these more complex situations where hearing loss is not just explained by damage to the inner ear, but hearing loss that has to do with more complex patterns of impairment. So being able to really understand what goes wrong in the brains of these individuals, how they compare to normal listeners, and what we might be able to do to alleviate the situation. If I had to invent something for my hearing impaired superhero, I would probably invent a hearing aid that is able to communicate with your brain and figure out what it is you want to listen to. So one very common task in listening is being able to prioritize and shift attention from one sound to another. So sometimes I want to listen to the TV, so I ignore everything else and listen to the TV, and the other time I want to listen to my friend, so I now ignore the TV and listen to my friend. And this is something that hearing impaired individuals, especially those that benefit from hearing aids or cochlear implants, are unable to do very well. If I could, I would invent a device that would be able to figure out what sound the person, my superhero, wants to listen to, and then amplify that sound, suppress everything else. And then when my superhero would decide, I actually want to listen to something else, I would quickly switch and amplify that sound and suppress the initial sound, and so on. I mean, it's not really science fiction, because there's active research in trying to design these devices. It's really complicated because so far we don't really understand both how hearing works and how attention works. But hopefully in the future this will be possible.